Okay. Shavua Tov. Okay, Shavua Tov. Already, okay. So, the next sukkah, we spoke about the din that it's not allowed to be higher than 20 amas, and now we'll go more on to a different sukkah now. We'll be coming back more again, but once we mentioned in the process, we talked about how wide the sukkah has to be, and the subject we spoke about was in the case that if it's a minimum width and if it's more, we brought down agav 2 sheets about if the minimum size of a sukkah and the length and the width is 7 by 7 tefachim, which is called Rosh Ruba V'Shulchana, or maybe Dalaramas, like 2 meters by 2 meters. That's the sukkah we had before. Now the Gemara is opening up that subject. We're on Gimel Amud Aleph, and that's about 10 lines from the top. Amar Rav Shmuel Bar Yitzchak. Halacha. The halacha is that sukkah has to be able, not talking about higher than 20 hours, somewhat a regular sukkah. A sukkah has to be minimum that it should be able to contain the man's head and robe of his body and his table. Rashi says that when we sit, the way we sit, so of course it has the head and the body, because if you're sitting up straight, so if your head is there, so your body is there, like there's no distinction. But he's talking about they used to eat reclining, so a person would be, even if his head is in the sukkah, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the body's in the sukkah because he's not sitting erect. That's why it has to be Rosh Ruba, and the Gemara says that means like 6 tefachim would get his Rosh Ruba. I don't think it means his legs. When you say body, Rosh Ruba means the head and most of his body.
A guy could sleep in the sukkah and have
his feet outside, right? Right, that would be kosher. And also says Shulchana, which the Gemara seems to say later on is going to be like a tefach. So like not a big table. You don't get a big table in, but you get something, 2x4 board. You can put in a sukkah like that. But he had also such kind of a sukkah.
And his feet would be outside.
Wow. Okay. So that's the halacha, and that's not. We're going to go through the sukkah now, but we can remember the first line as being the halacha of the whole page. That the halacha is that the sukkah, the minimum size is 7 by 7 tefachim. Here it doesn't say tefachim. Later on, the Gemara is going to say that, not today. But here it says the head and most of his body and his table, which the Gemara is going to say 7 by 7 tefachim. That has to do with that's Beishamai, and that has to do with Rashi brings out a Gemara that later on the Chav Ches over there. There's going to be the Mishnah coming up. The Gemara is going to mention it soon. It talks about the Mishahaya Rosh of Ruba B'Sukkah V'Shulchana B'Sukkah Bayis. This is later on in the 28th, and it says, let's read the words. We'll see it later on when we get it a little bit further down on the page. And it says if somebody Mishahaya, somebody whose head and most of his body was in the sukkah, but his table was inside the house. He had a sukkah right outside, adjacent to his house, and he's sitting in the sukkah, but his table is inside. So over there it says Beishamai Posel Beisil Machshir. Beishamai says it's a puzzle because you must have your table inside the sukkah also. And Beisil says that it's kosher even though your table is outside the sukkah. It's in the house. In the house is like saying outside. No difference if it's outside or it's in the house. But anyway, if you say here you have to have the table also, Rosh Ruba Shulchana, it sounds like Beishamai. Come on, can Beishamai? I'm like, yeah, well, come on, like who else? You're right. Like this pressure. You're right. I'm going like Beishamai, and it's exception to the rule passed like Beishamai against Beisila. You have to have the table inside also, and the size has to be also as big to get the table inside. Others have a different version of what we just said, more or less the same. He asked them, who tells you this? Who's the one who told you that Allah is that it has to be Rosh Ruba Shulchana? This is a Beishamai, right? It's Beishamai. But Lot tells me, don't move out of it. Means don't be hesitant and don't go away from this. Allah is like Beishamai that you have to have the table inside the sukkah also.
This is one of the Yalkut.
Yalkigam, you're talking about something else. Yalkigam is a Bayan Rava. Maskeflav Nachma Yitzchak. You might be Beshama Bistel Besukkah Katana Pligi, Dilma Besukkah Gedola Pligi, Uchgon, the Yosef Apuma de Metalalta, it says the Metulta, they say the Metalalta, Bishachon Besukkah Bais. Okay, it goes a little bit longer. Wait, 2 more lines. The Beshama Isabi Gazmina, Shama Yimashach Shulchano, Bisil Isabi Lo Gazmina. So far we spoke about, we understood the Machlokas over there in the Mishnah, that Chav Ches, that it says somebody sitting inside the sukkah, but his table is inside the house, Machlokas if it's possible kasha. So it's very, it's not clear what the Mishnah is talking about. So far the Gemara said it's talking about the minimum size of a sukkah. And Beis Shammai says you have to have the room for the table. Beisil says you don't have the room for the table. The Gemara is challenging the whole idea. Maybe everybody holds that the sukkah, they're not arguing in the minimum size sukkah. They're arguing in a big sukkah, a huge sukkah. You have a big sukkah, plenty of room, but your table happens to be inside the house. And the machlokes is going to be that you're sitting inside the sukkah, but if you're leaning over, if you were to sit erect and you would bring the food to you, so then no problem, you're inside the sukkah. But the fact that your table is inside the house or outside the sukkah, in other words, you might lean over to get to the table, like people eating soup, whatever it might be. and you might take your head out of the sukkah. If you're going to be, even if you're in the sukkah, your body's in the sukkah, but you recline your head outside the sukkah, so then you're not Yotze. So maybe it's nothing to do with the size of the sukkah. Maybe everybody holds you have to have enough, the sukkah big enough to get your table in. But the machlokus is, if your table happens to be out, no matter how big the sukkah is, means there are two ways to learn this Mishnah. You don't have it yet on the screen, but if we just, I don't remember if the Gemara is going to be quoting the Mishnah word for word, but it's, again, if anybody has a Gemara, they could jump to Daf Chav Ches. Over there it says, if somebody was his head and most of his body inside the sukkah, but his table was inside the house, the Shammai says it's possible, but he still says it's kasha. Just to point out, the Gemara is going to say that the Melashon itself is very strange. If you talk about the size of the sukkah, you shouldn't talk about if somebody was. Those words don't sound like it's a small, like it's not the size. Machlokas is the size of the sukkah. Somebody who was sounds like it's a big sukkah. But the point is, the problem is that technically his table is inside. But the end of the verse where it says pasul and kosher, that sounds like it's going on the sukkah. When you say somebody is in a kosher sukkah, but he's not doing it the right way, you don't, like if somebody, let's say, just for instance, he turns the esrog upside down. You don't say esrog is pasul. Esrog is a kosher esrog. He just didn't take it the right way. So if somebody has a kosher sukkah, just his table is outside, and choshish is going to eat outside, so it's not a pasul in the sukkah. You don't call it a pasul sukkah. So the person's not doing it right. This Mishnah has both Lashonos. It says if somebody was sitting in the sukkah with his table inside the house, the Shammai says it's pasul. So that word alone, it has two meanings. Like it starts off talking about a scenario about somebody, not about the sukkah, not about the size of the sukkah, but about the person, the way he's using it. And the end with pasul sounds like it's going on the sukkah. That's what the Gemara's issue is about. So the Gemara first started saying Machlokas is how big the sukkah has to be, and Beis Shammai says you have to have enough room for the table. Beis Hillel says you don't. The Gemara's question now, Rav Nachman Yitzchak is challenging that. Who says maybe they're not talking about sukkah? Sukkah like the minimum size sukkah. Is it talking about how small the sukkah could be? Maybe not. They're talking about a big sukkah, no problem about the size of the sukkah. He's sitting by the entrance, by the mouth of the sukkah. The matalalta means sukkah. The word is Aramaic word for tzail. Tzail is talala. So he's sitting by the opening of the sukkah, by the end of the sukkah. And Shulchan B'Socha Bayis, his table, it could be a big sukkah, but his table happens to be inside the house. Beishamai gets stuff because Beishamai goes and maybe he's going to be drawn after his table. He'll lean over onto the table and he's going to be out of the sukkah. And even though it's a big sukkah, he's not Yotzei. But says that as long as you stay inside the sukkah, you're okay because right now you didn't go out of sukkah. There's no gezerah. But you don't see that they're arguing about this minimum size sukkah. Maybe we still also agrees it has to have enough room for the table. Take an ami, Tiktani, Mishaya, Roshavu, Besukah Shacham, Besukah Bayis. It does quote the Mishnah here. It is. It says these are the words in the Mishnah. That's the highlight over here. Mishaya, Roshavu, Besukah, Beshalchono, Besukah Bayis. Okay, I didn't get the whole thing. Okay, there it is. Yeah, up. Okay. So that's the machlokis. So the words Besel Machshivin. One more line over there. Okay, I lost it. Okay, but anyway, these are the words of the Mishnah, and it says that Mishahaya. Mishahaya sounds like if somebody was, that doesn't sound like it's talking about the minimum size of the sukkah. It's not coming to be done on the structure of the sukkah. It's coming to be done how he used it. In Misa, if it's true that the Yorpshat, that it's talking about the minimum size sukkah, then it shouldn't talk about Mishahaya. It shouldn't talk about somebody whose head was in such a position. It should have spoken about if it contains, is the sukkah big enough to hold his table or not? The way that it says it sounds like it's a big sukkah. And the point is that his table is inside. That's a technical problem. So the more challenging that maybe everyone agrees that the minimum size sukkah does have to include big enough at least to be considered to include his table. The part might be that in order to be considered something as royal and dear, it has to have at least have enough room to get a table. You don't want to put the table inside, that's your business. But it might have to be big enough to have a table, maybe even according to Beis Hillel.
So the conclusion is that this talking about a small sukkah.
No, we didn't. No, the Gemara started off there talking about a small sukkah. Right now, we're in the middle of the challenge. The Gemara is challenging it and saying, no, it doesn't sound like that. It sounds like they're talking about a big sukkah, which is table, and his table happens to be inside the house, but not that it's talking about the small size sukkah. So the Gemara is challenging. Maybe everybody agrees that you do have to have the minimum size that it should contain the table, enough room for the table also. But the Gemara now challenges back. Now the Gemara is going to be a counter challenge. You want to say that the machlokas is only about if the table happens to be inside the house, and they're not arguing about the minimum size sukkah. There's a brisa that I'll show you. They're talking about the machlokas about the minimum size sukkah. But time you learned in a brisa, here we came across this sheet that we didn't say a name yet yesterday. Yesterday we just talked about the possibility that maybe sukkah has to be daled amos. Here we have it. Rebbe is the man Yama. Rebbe says that a sukkah has to be daled amos. So many sukkahs that we have are not kosher. It means according to Rebbe, many people have a big sukkah, but not everybody. This is like 2 meters by 2 meters. You have to have a very, very nice sukkah. But Tanakama says it's enough to have Rosh Hashanah b'Shulchan. Okay, here we have it. This is very short one machzekes. This Bryce is talking about the minimum size of the sukkah. Tanakama says it has to be able to contain his head, body, rope of his body, and his table. Rabbi says it has to have 2 by arbamas al arbamas. That's one Bryce. Yes.
It's a good size. You can sleep in.
Yes, the mamish. Yeah. The Tani Yidach, another Bryce says same machlokes, but instead of saying shulchano, the whole one's going to be this word shulchano over here. You have to have room for the table, according to the Tanakama. So here the Brisa is going to also bring Zamachok Rebbe under Rabbanan. Again, Rebbe's there. Rebbe Yom HaKol Sukkah Shem Ba'Abamas Alabamas Psula. So now we have any other Brisa also. This Brisa is consistent. The Rebbe holds you have to have Dalaramas. But Chacham Omim Afilu Ela Machzek is Ela Rosh Ruba Ksheira. Oh, it doesn't say the word shulchano. It just says Rosh Ruba. So here you have a Brisa that says Rabbanan say Rosh Ruba Shulchano, and here the Brisa says Rosh Ruba Vila Shulchano Lokatani. This Brisa doesn't say shulchano, just big enough to have Rosh Ruba, which will be 6 tefachim by 6 tefachim. Kashinadadi, the Brisa would be a contradiction. One Brisa says according to Rabbanan, just enough for his body, and the other one says also for his table. Ella Shramina, Ella La Shramina, Vishami Abisil. It must be that Rebbe is consistent in both places, Dalaramis, but 2 Brises, one holds by Shammai that you have to have room for the table also. The other one is Bisil says you don't have to room for the table. So there is a machlokis about if you this minimum size of the sukkah. So back to what we started saying, that according to Shammai, according to Bisil, you don't have to have room for the table. Now we're also going to bring a support that they're arguing in the size of the sukkah. The end of the Mishnah, not the Brisa, the Mishnah says if it's talking about that it's a big sukkah, just you put your table inside. The technical problem is not a din of the sukkah. It's not a puzzle of sukkah. Like it's like holding this esrog upside down. It's not a puzzle esrog unless you didn't use it right. The misa, if you're right that the machlokes is only about the size of the sukkah, not the size of the sukkah. The machlokes is how you're using the sukkah, that your table happens to be inside the house. It should not have used the words puzzle and it shouldn't have used the words puzzle and kosher. It should have used the words yotze and not yotze. The same way someone takes esrog upside down, he says not yotze, not that it's puzzle. So too, if the machlokes is only about the table happens to be out of the sukkah, you don't say that the puzzle of sukkah is puzzle. You just say you went yotze. So it's mashma here. It's mashma now that the machlokes on one hand it says mishahoya. Mishahoya Rosh Hashanah sounds like the issue is the table happens to be outside the sukkah. The word puzzle and kosher sounds like it's talking about the size of the sukkah. So velo kasha mishahoya. These words mean mishahoya as a quotation. Mishahoya is mishahoya b'socha sukkah. Means the beginning of the Mishnah mishahoya. He who was sounds like it's not talking about the size of the sukkah. It's talking about if his table happens to be inside or not. Then the Mishnah where it says puzzle kosher sounds like it is talking about the size of the sukkah. So it's a contradiction within the Mishnah alone. They're arguing. There's two machlokes going on. There's 2 machlokes. Pligi b'sukkah ketana, pligi b'sukkah gedola. They're arguing about the minimum size sukkah, but he still says you don't even have to have room for your table. It's enough to be Rosh Hashanah. He still, Bishamai says it has to be a big sukkah, enough to have your table also, and it's not enough just to have big enough for your table. Your table has to be mamish be inside. You have to edit it and put some words in. One machlokes is if you yotze or not. They have a big sukkah, but the table happens to be out of the sukkah. So Bishami says you're not yotze because gzeira you might lean over and you'd eat outside the sukkah. That's one machlokes. And Basil says yotze because not goes there. You're inside the sukkah. You're inside the sukkah. Now another machlokes is what's the minimum size of the sukkah. And if there's not enough room to bring the table in, Bishami says the sukkah is possible even if you didn't bring, you're holding a sandwich and there's no table at all. Also, Bishami says the size is enough to have your table also. So we finished up. That's the machlokes. 2 machlokes going on. I think we're finished right now. Yeah, we're finished the first of year, and that's true. The more comes out, there are 2 machlokes in Bishama B'Silo. The minimum size of a sukkah, and we pass on Bishama, it has to be what we call 7 by 7 tefachim. It doesn't say, and this Gemara didn't mention any numbers. It just said Rosh Ruba, Rosh Ruba B'Shulchan, but later on the Gemara is going to say 7 tefachim. So we pass like B'Shamai, it has to be 7 by 7 tefachim, and we also pass like B'Shamai. It's machlokes already by L'maisa. We pass like B'Shamai that even if it's a big sukkah, if you're eating on a table which is outside the sukkah, you're not yotze either because you might lean over. I think if you're not using a table at all, there's no thing you have to have a table. If you're eating with your hands, eating on a plate on your lap, I don't think it's okay. But if you're eating on a table and the table is outside the sukkah, so you're not yotze because you might stick your head out. So we finished the first sugya, and we passed them like Bishamai, and 2 machlokes. One is the minimum size sukkah, 7 by 7 tefachim, enough to get your table inside. And the second machlokes is if you have a big sukkah, but your table happens to be outside, and you're eating erect, and you're bringing the food to yourself, but you might lean over the table, so you're not Yotze in that case either. Once the Gemara mentioned the issue of the sheet of Rebbe that says the sukkah has to be 4 by 4 amos, the Gemara is going now onto that sukkah. We're changing sukkahs now to a new issue about 4 amos. Who's the author of the following brisa? And here it talks about a house. We're talking about a sukkah till now, and now we're talking about a house. What's the minimum size of a house? Now that we think of a house as a very big thing, many rooms. But in the old days, a house was a room. If you had 2 rooms, so you had like a double house. Like each a house was one room, a bais. So what's the minimum size of a room? So it says here, so a house that's less than 4 by 4. Just to point out, they talk about 4 by 4, that it does not mean the area of 4 by 4. It's not enough to be long and skinny. It has to be 4 by 4. 4 amos one direction, 4 amos other direction, in that shape. Some understand that there's machlokes rishonim about it, but we can talk about it at a different time. But the Pashtas, not the Pashtas, has proven that there's no machlokes about it. The Rambam might have been misunderstood, misunderstood by the Rosh. The Rosh misunderstood the Rambam, but it's proven that the Rambam also agrees to the Rosh that it means it has to be that shape. It has to be a shape of 4 amos by 4 amos.
It's like 2 amos wide, but like 10 amos long.
Right.
Still
No good, right? Because it's not called living. It's not livable. It has to be the shape of 4 amos by 4 amos, which would mean 2 meters by not 1.92 by 1.92. This is Negat Hilchos Mezuzahs. People have rooms in their house that sometimes are small, and it's only chayiv in a mezuzah if it's going to be 4 by 4. And you're allowed to be samach on this la'alach. If it's less than 4 by 4, you don't need a mezuzah.
So there's people in America that have closets.
The closet itself.
Women have closets for their clothing.
And if it's bigger, it needs mezuzah. 2 meters by 2 meters. So in the Shulchan Aruch, it's going to say that there's a suffix if it has the area, let's say 2 by 10 or something like that, that it's machlokes put up without a bracha. But if anybody wants to talk about it, we can talk about it at length. That is proven that the Rambam didn't mean that. The Rosh thinks the Rambam meant that, and he says no. But they prove that the Rambam himself doesn't mean that. And it's a Taz, and also we have the different editions of the Rambam in Arabic, and that it was just a different way of talking, but that's the halacha. And everybody holds like that, that if it's not the shape of 4 amos by 4 amos, it's not chayiv in a mezuzah. That's the first halacha. If you have such a kind of a house, it's not, even though it has a roof, you're not chayiv to put a fence around the roof because it's not called a house. If it gets a nega, that teras habayis, if there's a nega on the house, it's not called a house, so it doesn't become tameh. The din is in a house that's inside a walled city. If somebody sells it, so then he only has a year to buy it back. It's supposed to compare, and then the end of Sefer Yikra, and he only has a year to buy it back. If he doesn't buy it back within the year, so the buyer gets it a full sale, doesn't go back in Yovel. So that's only if it's a house, but less than 4 by 4 is not called a house, and therefore wouldn't have that halacha, and it could be redeemed. This is talking about when it says that the person got married, or he planted a vineyard, or he built a house, and then he doesn't go to war for the first year. What does it say? It doesn't say first year. It says if he built a house and he did not use it, so then he goes back, doesn't go to war. But that's not called a house, only if it's 4 by 4. It says there's a long list of halachas, all these things that it's not called a house less than 4 by 4. Later on, the Gemara is going to say the sources of all these things. That's all about Erevin. We have Maseches Erevin that in order to be able to carry in a courtyard that has many houses that open up into it. So since each one has an individual house and everyone's sharing a shared courtyard, so it looks a little bit like a Rishus Yachad, Rishus Rabbim scenario. Each one has a private house and a joint. So some people, if you're going to carry from one to the other, even though really the whole thing is Rishus Yachad, the whole courtyard is Rishus Yachad, but it looks a little bit like you're going from a private domain to a public domain. So you're not allowed to carry over there only if you pull together bread. And by Chatzeris, it's the same thing. If you have any courtyards open up into an alleyway called a mavoy, also you have to pull together food in order to be able to carry. But that's only if it's a house. But if you have a house which is less than $1, it's not called a house, and you wouldn't have to join. You're not considered you're living there. Your house is not a house. It's like a blanket, whatever. You're there, but you're not in the house. So you wouldn't have to join in the Eruv, in Mishnafimbo, if you happen to be in a chutzah which has no other houses, just your house, which is less than $1, so you wouldn't have to join into the shituf of the whole mobile because you're not a house, you're just living on the street. You don't have, also you're not allowed to put the Eruv into that house because besides joining in the Eruv, each person pulls in bread together, you have to put it someplace. You put it into one of the houses, but you have to put it into a house. But if somebody's house which is less than $1, it's not called a house. That also have to be careful to put into a closet that you shouldn't, if you have one of these big closets, so then you shouldn't put the Eruv into a closet which is less than 4 by 4. Could be that has ramifications. In the Rav's house, usually people don't know what an Eruv is. Usually it's in the Rav's house or the one who's in charge of the Eruv. So if he has a big closet like that, so make sure the closet is big. Not only a big closet, it should be a 4x4. The Bryce continues back to onto the next page. The also knows the Ibu ben Shtei. This is talking about Rubi Tchumen. Rubi Tchumen, you have 2,000 amos from the end of the city limits, and you have. But then it talks about if there's a Ibur between two cities. It talks about if you have each Ibur is considered 70 amos for Shirayim, and it talks about 70 and 2/3 of an amma. And if between the two cities there's less than 2 Iburim or 1 Ibur, that's machlokas over there. An Ibur is considered like an extension of the city, like a margin call it. So it says like 70 amos. It's about 70 amos, a little bit more. And if you have a house between two cities, so that the city, that house will consider the two cities joined together as one big city, because it's like a continuum of houses. So that's only, we had that in there. So that's only if it's considered a house. What's a house again? Only if it's 4 amos by 4 amos. If not, it's not considered a house. And the last thing, if there's a house that was joint property of two brothers that they got a Yerusha or two partners and they want to divide, so they don't divide if it's less than $1 amos, because it's not called a house. So this is a big brisa about all kinds of hilchos houses, and it says all of them that has to be $1 amos or $1 amos, or else it's not considered a house. And now the Gemara says, we just said machlokas by a sukkah. Some say you don't have to have $1 amos; it's enough to have 7 tefachim. Is this dependent? The one who says that a sukkah could be less than $1 amos, is he going to say that a house also could be less than $1 amos? Maybe this only goes according to Rebbe, who says that a sukkah has to be $1 amos, but according to Rabbanan, it could be smaller. Maybe a house also could be smaller. No, there's a difference between a sukkah and a house. I feel Rabbanan. Even Rabbanan could agree that a house has to be $1 amos. Ad kan lakami Rabbanan hasam el inyan sukkah. Only by a sukkah they say the dira sarah is only a temporary dwelling. That's enough to be 7 to get your house, your head and your goof and your shulchan in. But it's not a house. House you have to be able to have some use over there, so it has to be $1 amos. But the Indian gabi buys the diras keva he. Afilu Rabbanan modu the isbei $1 amos $1 amos dariba inchi be low dariba inchi. It only has to be big enough people could live there. To live there it has to be $1 amos $1 amos. So he passed like this also, that in order to be all these halachas, usually what's most negated to us is mezuzah. Anything else that's negated to us over there? And the Amud Aleph, I forgot what the list is already. But Micah also, yeah. Okay, but usually people have. Usually the question is only by us. We don't have such small things, but as a room, we have a room sometimes that's a small room. But as far as Micah, usually you're not going to have a house that the whole thing is less than $1 amos. But if you do, that would also be, maybe they have this also by some of the watch, like the Shomrim, that they have a little booth. Maybe that'll be a question. If it's less than $1, if it's $1 amos, so then it has to have a mic on the roof also. If they use the roof, I guess. I don't know if they use the roof sometimes. They don't use the roof. Okay, I don't know if it has no way to get to the roof. Probably it doesn't need a mic if there's no way to get to it in the first place. Okay, I don't know. As mezuzah, right? It might need a mezuzah, right? Right. If it's $1, right? If the big one, the small one is not going to need. Is it considered okay? So here we have the mezuzah. Anything else in the get to us nowadays? Not too much. Micah, okay. Megoyim, Atirachoma, Archamochama, Erevin, okay. But people don't live in such a small house. If anything, it's a small room. So most of these cases are not so get to us. But halachically, all these halachas are not considered a house if it's less than $1, and nothing to do with machlokas by sukkah. By sukkah, we hold that 7 tefachim is enough, but by a house it has to be $1 amos. So far we don't do it just to get everything away. The one halacha is the sukkah minimum size is 7 tefachim. A house the minimum size is $1 amos. But $1 amos, we also have the halacha that if your house, if your table is inside the house by the edge of the sukkah, you'll say not yosef because you might bend over.
But too long ago, we rented a house, a normal size house of 4x4, and a rich person's house of 4x6.
Yeah, that could be, but that's still called a house. Yeah, you're right. It goes on Baba Basra. There are all kinds of what's called a palace, what's that, real. But that's true. That's only as far as Mekach or Memka, but it's still called a house. You're not going to say it's not called a house because it's not a rich man's house.
It's on the cusp of not being a house and being a normal house.
Yeah, less than $1 amos is not a house at all. And if this is a normal room, this is normal. Less than that is not considered a normal room. And then there's a richer room. Yeah, there's bigger rooms. Our rooms are probably the rich man's rooms. We're very rich. But sometimes you get a small room. Sometimes. What do they call them? We have the washing machine, things like that. What do they call the cheder sheirut or something like that? Cheder sheirut. Okay. Also, sometimes in the miklatim, if you know the miklat, sometimes they have a big miklat, but sometimes it's like small rooms off to the side. And if it's not $1 by $1, it's not chayiv in a mezuzah. Now we're going to go back to what we spoke about. The whole list. The Gemara is going to now elaborate a little about it, each thing. So in the list, there are some things that it says in the Torah. Whenever it says in the Torah, the Gemara is going to say it's not called a house. That's part of the list, 5 things, I think. Mezuzah, Micah, Negoim, and going back to Mulchama. So all these things, the Gemara says, all the Raisa, and that's the definition of a house. My time. What's the reason for all these 5 things? The bias, all of these places, these halachas says a house. Maybe go to Rashi a second. Rashi gives us all the second. Here's the Rashi. Kuluk Sibu bias. Mezuzah's Beisecha. That's by Mezuzah. Kisin the bias Chadash. That's by going back from Orchem Mulchama. Oh no. That's a marker. Kisin bias is by making a fence. Obasha Lo bias is talking about Negoim. Kiyimko Beis Moshav Yerchoma is talking about selling a house and what they are Yerchoma. Hashabana bias Chadash is about going back from war. So by all of them, it says the word bias. So bias means Dalet Amos with Dalet Amos. So that's
more than that. You don't need to have market.
Right. Right. So, okay. It's okay. If it means that people don't use it, it's not called a usable thing. It's not called a bias. Okay. Where do we have it? All the bias. Okay. Then the rest of the things are not the bias, right? The rest of the things are drabana. So you can't say because it doesn't say bias. That's all about Eruvin, that you're not trying to chip into the Eruv if your house is less than $1 Amos, and also you can't put the Eruv into a house which is less than $1 Amos. My time with the because it's not fit for, not because it's not a house, it's no din house, but it's not fit for a living. Same idea as before, but before we were trying to translate the word house because the Torah used the word house. Here we're saying that the Chachamim only made the din of Eruvin on something which is fitting for living purposes. The next thing is a side point. Now it's a side point that when it's talked about, you're not trying to be chipping in the Eruv, you're not trying to chip into the Shituf, then it says you can't put the Eruv in it. But it doesn't say you can't put the Shituf in it. So that's to back up again, that a Shituf means when you join together different courtyards that they're able to carry in the mobile. Eruv means when you join different houses together to be able to carry in the courtyard. And a Shituf means when you join courtyards together to be able to carry in and out of the courtyards into the alleyway, the mobile. So when the Brisa says that you're not allowed to put the Eruv into this house because it's not called a house, it doesn't say you're not allowed to put the Shituf into it. Why not? And the Gemara is going to explain because there's no such thing to put a Shituf into a house. The din of an Eruv is that everyone's living in the same house. So everybody chips in, they pull food together, they put it into one of the houses of the courtyard, and it's considered everybody's living in that one house, one happy family, so therefore they're not considered separate private domains, they're all one common domain. But the word of the Shituf, when you do Shituf, it's not connecting the houses. It's not like everyone's living in the same house. Over there, we just want to connect all the courtyards together. So to connect the courtyards, it has nothing to do with the house. So therefore, there'd be no halacha that you have to put the Shituf into a house. You don't have to. You can leave it in the courtyard. You can leave it outdoors. It doesn't have to be, Eruv has to be indoors. It has to be in the house. Everyone's living over there. But by Shituf, but that's not the lumdus. So the doesn't have to be put into a house. This is like a side point. It's like a parentheses kind of thing. The rice is mash, but you can't put the Eruv Chatzeris into a house which is less than $1 Amos. But the Shituf from a boy should be able to put inside a house that's less than $1 Amos. My time, but why? Because it's not worse than the courtyard. You don't have to put it into the house. You just have to put it into the courtyard. It does have to be in the courtyard of one of the courtyards of that mobile. You can put it into the alleyway. You have to put it into one of the courtyards, but it doesn't have to be in a house in the courtyard. The Eruv has to be in one of the houses, and it's going to back that up. The Tanan, we learned in a Mishnah, Eruv Chatzeris Chatzer. That's the quotation of the Mishnah, and right away it's going to have to fix it up. It says Eruv Chatzeris goes in the courtyard, and we just said that's not true. It has to be in the house. That doesn't make sense. But the words are Eruv Chatzeris is in the courtyard, Shitufim Avois is in the mobile, and the Gemara says that doesn't make sense. But Avin and Bo, we asked over there, Eruv Chatzeris b'Chatzer, you can put Eruv Chatzeris into a Chatzer, it has to be inside the house. But Tanan, Anos Eruv b'Beishar, Sadam Pesach, Eruv Adoshim Enosa. It says if you put the Eruv into something which is not a house, a Beishar would be the vestibule going into the house. A Sadr is like a pergola. Merpeses is a balcony or something of some sort, a walkway, like when you walk up the steps, like a stairwell, and a Eruv, because it has to be inside the house. So how could you say that it's good enough to be inside in the Chatzer? Eruv Chatzeris, but Chatzer is not true. Also, Agav, it continues. If somebody's living over there, someone's going to live for Shabbos in the Achsadra or Pesach, he's going to camp out on the stairwell, so he's not chayv in the Eruv because it's not a house. That's not our point right now. We want to know where you have to put the Erev. And it says, ain't no Erev. If you put it inside these places, it's not considered an Erev because it has to be inside the house. So how could you say it's not true? It surely has to be in a house, but it has to be a house in that chatzar. You can't put a house in somebody else's chatzar. It has to be one of the houses of this courtyard. And when it says shituf voice it means that it has to be in one of the chatzars of this mob. It doesn't have to be in a house. It has to be in a courtyard that's part of this alleyway. But anyway, what does it say? That you're allowed to put the shituf voice in the courtyard. It doesn't have to be in the house. This is not worse than that. This house, which less than $1 is not worse than being outdoors. It's not called a house. So just to sum it up, what did it say? That the Erev has to be in a house, and a house less than $1 is not called a house. But a shituf voice doesn't have to be in a house. It has to just be someplace in the courtyard.
Do we assume that even that little 4x4 or less than 4x4 has a chatzar beside? Because you're talking about that you just need putting the chatzar.
Right. It's in a chatzar. It's in a chatzar. It's in a courtyard. It's in a courtyard, and he wants to be part of and the people are making a shituf. And he's not chayv to be part of that because his house is less than $1. This house is not chayv to be part of that, but they want to put it someplace, so they could put it in that house. Why? Because it's not worse than being outdoors. It's not a house. You're allowed to put it outdoors as long as it's in the chutzner of this mobile. It can't be a chutzner someplace else. It has to be here, part of this campus over here. So we're good with that. So what we have so far, that the places in the Torah where it says 5 times a house by definition means 4 amos by 4 amos. Then this thing about Erevin. It doesn't have to do with a house, not Allah in a house, but it's they're abundant, made a takana, a place which is royal ladira. This is not called royal ladira. And also, we just came across the halacha that shituf doesn't have to be put into a house; it could be in the courtyard. And this house, which doesn't have is not worse than that. That's because it has a around it, it's a big container, but it's not worse than it being inside the chutzner. The brayse continued. The ain also top line over here. The ain also ibu ben shtechat ayoros. We spoke about that if you have 2 cities and you're counting the tchum. But if there's a house between both of them that is less than the 70 amos plus 70 2/3 amos, so then it's not enough to connect the 2 cities to be considered one city. When you count the Erev Tchumen, not the Erev Tchumen, you count the 2,000 amos from the end of the city. If you have a house that connects the 2 cities, so then it's considered one continuum and it's one big city. But this house, which is less than the amos, is not considered such a kind of a house. And what does the Gemara explain about that? A borginen is like a hut, like a shomer's hut, like a guard's hut or something like that. And that doesn't have to be Dalet Amos. And over there, it is considered enough to extend the 2 cities to be considered one. How come this house is less than that? What they see by a borginen, that doesn't have to be Dafka house. There's no din house. Even a shomer's hut is also good enough. But here, this is worse because this is not a shomer's hut. This is a house. It's not a house. Here, it's not. If you look at borginen, we don't consider it even like a borginen. Why not? Why not? My time. For if it's a hut for a shomer, so then it's good enough. Okay, it's a good shomer's hut. So it's enough to be able to continue to extend the 2 cities to combine them to be considered one. But this thing is not. Yes, because it's a shomer's. No, it's a house. It's not a house either. So then it's not. That's why it doesn't count.
What's the miltei mean?
Miltei lidvarav leinyano. It's a borginen is ra'oi leinyano. V'zeh lo ra'oi leinyano. And the last thing was I think this is the last thing. That you brothers or partners don't divide us. I would have thought that it means that it doesn't say that, but I would have thought that it means that since we said that a house is only when it's Dalet Amos, so you can't divide it because if it's not going to be left Dalet Amos for each person, so that's not called. I'm not getting a house. You're going to give me a 2 Amos 2 by 4. It has to be 4 by 4. I would have thought that's what it meant, but it doesn't say that. It says if you have a house less than Dalet al Dalet, you can't divide it. But if you have a house which is Dalet al Dalet, you could divide it. That doesn't make sense because we said each one has to be able to get a house. It's not called Roy Lachaluka. That's more kasha. The Gemara doesn't make sense. You're saying that it's only because it doesn't have Dalet Amos. That's why you don't force the other one to divide. But if it has Dalet Amos, you could force him to divide. It's not Roy Lachaluka. But even a chutzner is not considered dividable till each one gets something which is a chashuv thing. So a house which is Dalet al Dalet is not chashuv. You can't divide it. Now each house is going to be 2.
Yeah, now it's a house. But you want
now it's a house, but yeah, you divide. Each one's going to have a half house. Well, it's a half a house. So it doesn't make sense. So the Gemara changes that a little bit. It does mean to divide the house. It means ein bo din chalukah. What does that mean? Kechatzer, bechatzer. The Gemara is going to explain that we're really not talking about dividing the house. We're talking about dividing the chutzah. This house is in a chutzah. And the Gemara now brings down the din of Baba Basra that talks about when Yorshim or Shufim, when they are dividing Yerusha, let's say, and how much does each house have rights in the chutzah? means that the chutzner is made to be mishamesh the house. And according to how many, the Moses said, according to how many doors, it could be that's going to be how much rights you have in the courtyard. The Moses give an example over here. Let's see. Amar Avuna, chutzner l'fi p'sachem eschalekes, Rav Chisda Omer, Amar no saying. They give an example that let's say you have one brother took one house. Let's say there was one big house and three small houses. That was the father's estate. And when they divided it, the one house was equal to the three houses. So one brother took one house and the other brother took the three small houses. But then there's a courtyard also. There's a courtyard in between on this whole thing. So the one who has three houses, he needs more space in the chutzner. The use of the chutzner is mishamish the house, and each house has a chelik in the chutzner. So even if one has the same size, one big house is equal to three small houses, but each door. So how do you divide it? So Machlokes over here, Rav Huna says the people sechem is chalakes. According to how many doors, that's how many shares you get in the chutzner. So if one has three doors to the chutzner, he gets three shares, and the other one has one, he gets one. They'll divide the chutzner into four, even though as far as the property, they get equal use of the houses. His one house is as big as his three houses, but as far as the use of the chutzner, it goes according to how many doors you have. And the other shita says a little different. Rav Chisda says that each door gets daled amas, and the rest of it you divide equally. You don't say the whole chutzner is b'shamish. Each door needs, like Rashi says, that when you load, let's say you're unloading, you want to bring your car straight up to the door, so you need place to unload in front of your house. But the rest of the chutzner is divided equally. But each door, if one of them has three doors, one of them has one door, he'll get in front of each door. He gets a daled amas, not daled amas. He gets daled amas into the chutzner as big as as wide as the door is. I think Rashi says more or less. But the rest of the chutzner is going to be divided equally. Whatever you hold, this only applies to a house which is daled amas, and that's what I meant to say. That doesn't have a din chalukah. That means that when you're going to divide the chutzner according to how many doors you have, that's only a house which has daled amas.
All three houses have to be daled.
Right. Any house which does daled amas doesn't get any door. It's not called a door. The hani merely buys the mevikoi. That's only a house which is destined to remain. Then you have hidnale chutzner. Then he has rights to the chutzner for the house. But this house, which is not a house, it's not wishful, it's less than daled amas. The lemistakoi, it's omed, it's destined to be demolished. Lo yavin le chutzner. He doesn't have any eligibility in the chutzner. So that's the end of the subject. That's the end of the daf. What we have today, that first we spoke about the minimum size of a sukkah. A focus if it's daled amas, that's Rebbe. We don't pass like that. Then Beishamai Beisil. Beishamai says 7 by 7 in order to get Rosh Hashanah. That's how we pass against Beisil. It says that would have been enough to be 6 by 6. Just to get Rosh Hashanah. Agav came in over there also machlokes. Even if you have a big sukkah, Beishamai says that you're not Yosef, your table is in the side because you might lean over. And we pass like that also. After that, we came across all these halachas that some houses only called a house, even according to Rabbanan, that say a sukkah could be 7 tefachim, but a house has to be daled amas. That's how we paskin. And all these examples, some of them are the Raisa. The most relevant one is the mezuzah, and it means 4 by 4. The shape of 4 by 4, 1.92 meters by 1.92 meters, and less than that is not chayv in the mezuzah. And all these other halachas about Micah, Tumas Negam, instead of all these halachas, then we had also about Erevin, that it's not chayv in Erevin. Also, you can't put the Erev in such a small room, less than daled amas. After that, we had also about, what else did we have here? That was all about Erevin. Everything after that?
You're allowed you to do a shituf.
Right. Right. You're allowed to put the sheet into the chutzner. You don't have to put it into a house. And then about Erev Tchumen, that a borgen and even a guard's hut will be able to combine two cities together as far as counting Tchumen, but a house, which is not a house, and it's not a borgen either, so it doesn't count that. Shutfin, dividing it, that the Gemara says, of course, you can't divide the house unless you can divide it into two houses. Each house is going to be daled al daled. If you have one house, then you surely can't divide, even if it's daled al daled. But it isn't get to this halacha of how much rights you have in the chutzner when they divide the Yerusha, so that each door is eligible to rights in the chutzner. Either the whole chutzner is divided proportionately, or as we paskin, like Rav Chisda, that each door gets daled amas around it. That's only a house which is daled amas, but if the house itself is not daled amas, you don't have rights to the chutzner because of that house. Ad Khan. Thank you.
Mr. Koch.
Why is Hamlachat Ner Chanukah not mentioned?
What should you say that
Because the issue made to all, why don't they say
that? What are you saying that a house less than daled amas there's no thing to put a.
They shouldn't be able to light?
You don't light in a house that's less than daled amas. What does everybody say about that? That you shouldn't be chayiv in a ner Chanukah in a house that doesn't have daled amas.
No mention, why not?
It sounds like a nice question. Anybody? Any suggestions that you shouldn't be chayiv in Chanukah if it's not for the house to be?
that doesn't have anything to do with a house lighting the
Why
Hanukkah.
not? If you have no house, you don't light Ner Hanukkah. If you have no house, you're just in the street.
Yeah,
you
it
have no
says
house.
Ishu Beso. It says Ishu Beso.
Over there, Beso means the household. Over there, but Lamaisi, you put it Pesach Beso. If you have no house, someone's out, he has no house, and then it's not Chayv Ner Hanukkah. Over there, it says he makes a bracha on somebody else's Hanukkah. He see Aroa. He says it when he sees somebody else's, but you only light if you have a house. So it's
That's if he has no place to live. That's if he has a place to live. It's not. It's an issue of living, not an issue of a house.
It's not a house. What do you mean? If he, let's say he has a little tent or something like that, you say wood, also a tent and a sleeping bag. That also, if he's sleeping in a sleeping bag, you'll say also that he's going to put a Ner Hanukkah over there.
He doesn't.
If he has a sleeping, he has no Pesach Beso, but Pesach.
So
Pesach. What's there?
even though it's
There's
not
no
royal, royal Ladira, all these things, the Erevin is royal Ladira. Here, you don't need royal Ladira for Hanukkah. Okay.
If you're
sounds-
camping out, on Hanukkah, you probably would light Hanukkah candles, would you?
No, not.
You wouldn't.
People might do it just for the feeling, for the what do you call it? Yeah, no bracha.
Nostalgia. Pirsumei Nisa.
Presumably, but that's like an idea, but not a bracha. It's not a halachic Ner Hanukkah.
Rebbe,
So
last
listen,
night,
it would be chayiv even if it's not halachically a house. Could be. I don't know. I didn't think of it. Sounds like a nice point. Probably they did talk about it. Yes,
Rebbe,
please.
last night you mentioned something b'shem Rav Gottlieb. I can give you the makor now because Rav Michal brought it. It's
Uh-huh.
actually a Gemara. It says here, but Teretz Haritva b'shem Tosva shebiyamei Tishrei ein hashemesh holeches be'emsa rakia mamish elonoita litzdadim k'mavar b'pesachim tzadi dalid amid beit.
Yes. So who's the one who said? Who's the one who applies it to our Gemara?
You seem to say last night you heard it.
I
from
got
Rav
it from Rav
Gottlieb.
Gottlieb. Where are you getting
Right.
it from?
It's tzadi dalid amid beit in
Yes.
in
Yes, but
Pesachim.
who applies it to the
The
Gemara?
Ritva, the
Ritva
Ritva.
himself says it over here. Yeah,
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Much
one more
appreciated.
thing, very, very interesting about bargaining. Rav Michal brings there's a Ritva in bargaining that he says that by bargaining, the Yu'ud, the tafkid of a bargaining is it was sukkah sha'oisino sabedrachim b'sapek behem mayim umazon la'otei drachim.
I didn't think so.
So they were roi for the Yud, for that Yud. So because even though there's not dalad by dalad, therefore they are an ibor ben shtei ayaros, but as a bias, that Yud is to live there. So they're not roi for that Yud. So
Yes,
from
basically-
that ritva, the Rashash brings a very interesting din. The Rashash says that from here you can be mochiach that a bias shar, an opening to a house, a base shar, like I guess that's like an etzadra, that's pachos, that's patuach labayis, in front of a bias, even though it doesn't have dalad by dalad, it should be chayiv in a mezuzah, because he says kevan sheyudo lishmira, since its yud is a shmira on the bias, v'roi lamataraso, and it's roi for that yud, ain't sorry sheyebo dalad al dalad, behind Kiperusha Hasheni Shalaritva, Shein Sark Shiabo Dalad Amud. So he holds that would be chayiv in a mezuzah. I guess it's al tafel leikar, and its yud is as a shmira to the bias.
Very good. Yeshikoch. The Borgenen is usually Borgenen is usually referred to as a shomer's hut, the hut of a shomer. You're saying that it's for the water for the holy drach. I don't know where that comes from.
Well,
Usually
I think we had a Gemara like that.
Okay, Yashikov. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Much appreciated. Thank you. Shavua Tov. Shavua Tov, Eli.
Yeshikoch, Toda raba.
Thank you. Kalte, be well. Shavua Tov. Yes, Emmanuel, are you still there?
Hello, good talk. Eliezer
Good
Osmar.
talk.
Good talk, Emmanuel. I, if you don't mind, I think I saw you had printed out your Rosh Hashanah Var Torah that you sent by the Siyam.
Yeah.
Can you possibly email it to me?
I'd be happy, and I'd love to hear your commentary, because if I did anything wrong or anything is not could be improved. I noticed in the parsha today, I have 3 things to add to it now, so I'll put them in before I send it to you.
Terrific, because you brought down a lot of important Makairis, I think.
It's all Makairos. I was makabel from my Rebbe in Jewish, Rav Michael Silber. 90% of what you say in Jewish has to be makaras, and the only thing you can be mepakpek on is the connections and the bridges that you make, the conclusions. But you should always build only on makaras. So that's what I tried to do.
Terrific.
I'm sorry it took so long, though. I think it would have been appropriate from the beginning to mail it out to everybody. I just was very inspired because my Rebbe's blind now, and I wanted to do it for him, but I didn't realize it would take so long. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, for whatever, but you said very important stuff there.
Yeah, I would like to hear commentary from the Olam, anybody that wants to have commentary, because I spent a lot of work on it. And for me, it was actually deeper than that. It was the culmination of 9 years of living with a trauma that I have because people who are supposed to be my support system actually helped ruin my children. And the bottom line of the board is when you have to protest, when you don't, and what is kapara, and when you have to be moichel, when you don't. And I realized after I finished it that it was actually about my life in that respect. So it was important for me. I just hope that other people will gain from it also. Bezrat Hashem. Call too.
You should have a refuah shalema.
Yeah, my voice is always this way after 9:30 at night. I think it's allergies. It's the season of year. It's just a frog in my throat. I get it like 9 at night every night. Call too.
Be careful about the kashrus.
Yeah. Yes, Akoya. I want to hear the drasha you prepared. That's what I want to hear. You can tell me any day you have time. You call me or you let me call you. I want to hear your drasha. I miss your drasha.
Thank you.
Call too.